This Level 8 Music Theory course has been generously sponsored by Musicians English, the Calgary-based music organization which helps connect Korean music teachers with the RCM's music theory curriculum. For more information about this great program, you can check out the link in the description below. Now today we're going to talk about something called modes. You can think of a mode as being a scale that composers in the medieval times used to use to build their music out of. Now there is one key difference between our major and minor scales and modes. Modes do not have tonics. They have something called tonal centers. The reason modes have tonal centers instead of tonics is because modes do not contain leading tones. So they don't have the same amount of tension that our major and minor scales contain. The tonal center is enough to begin and end the piece with and make the audience feel stable, but you can't quite build up the same amount of tension as you would be able to in just the regular major and minor scale. Now you might be wondering, why do you have to learn about scales that were used in the medieval times? That's a long time ago and we've moved on. The reason we have to learn about these today is because they became really popular again in the 20th century. In fact, many of your List C pieces in your RCM repertoire book use modes. You might have even played one without knowing it. So it's important for us to be able to identify them and analyze them when we come across them. Now, before I can show you what they are on the piano, we have to learn a slightly silly rhyme together. And you have to have this memorized. So listen carefully. I'm going to speak 7 words, and you have to memorize them and remember what order they're in. It goes like this. I don't play like my Aunt Lucy. 7 words. I don't play like my Aunt Lucy. And each one of these words is going to remind us of the name of a mode. And the order in which they occur is going to help remind us of the scale degree we have to start on. So let's get started. The first word in that rhyme was I. I stands for the modal name called Ionian. Now you can think of the word Ionian as also meaning a major scale from tonic to tonic. So if you hear the word Ionian or see it in your textbook, you can just think of it as meaning a major scale from tonic to tonic. 1 is the tonic, that's why it's the first word. Second word, I don't. Don't starts with a D, and that D reminds us of the modal name Dorian. You can think of Dorian as meaning major scale from supertonic to supertonic. So whenever you're presented with the word Dorian, you can think major scale supertonic to supertonic. Dorian is the second word, and supertonic means 2. Third word, I don't play. Play starts with a P, and that's for the modal name Phrygian. And Phrygian is another way of saying a major scale from mediant to mediant. Mediant is scale degree 3. Phrygian, play, is the third word in our rhyme. Fourth word, I don't play like. Like starts with an L, and this L represents the modal name Lydian. Lydian means subdominant to subdominant. So if you're asked to write a Lydian scale, you have to write a major scale from subdominant to subdominant. Fifth word, I don't play like my. My starts with an M, and M represents the modal name Mixolydian. Mixolydian is the same as saying a major scale from dominant to dominant. Sixth word, I don't play like my aunt. A. A represents the modal name Aeolian. It's the 6th word in that pattern, and Aeolian essentially means play a major scale from submediant to submediant. Submediant is the sixth note of a major scale. And the last one, I don't play like my Aunt Lucy. Here we have another L word. The first one was Lydian, but this last L represents the modal name Locrian. And Locrian is the same as saying play a major scale from leading tone to leading tone, from scale degrees 7 to 7. And Locrian is the seventh word in our rhyme. I don't play like my Aunt Lucy helps you remember Ionian, Dorian, Phrygian, Lydian, Mixolydian, Aeolian, and Locrian modes. Now, every time I did that, I was always talking about major scales. When you're working with modes, we are always referring to major scales. We don't use natural minor or harmonic minor or melodic minor scales when we're thinking in the context of modes, okay? So when we're saying, for example, play a Lydian mode, which means a scale from subdominant to subdominant, we're always talking about a major scale from subdominant to subdominant, not a minor scale from subdominant to subdominant. We don't use minor scales for modes. So let's look and see what that actually looks like on the piano. Let's start with A Dorian, okay? So the question might be, write a Dorian scale on A, or the question might be, write an A Dorian scale. That's two different ways of saying the same thing. The first piece of information we know for sure is that the mode starts on A and it ends on A. It's an A Dorian scale. Now we have to ask ourselves, what does Dorian mean? Which word is that? I don't. Dorian was the second word in our rhyme, I don't, and that was, second is 2, so Dorian must mean supertonic to supertonic. So if the first note is A, I then have to ask myself, A is the supertonic of what major scale? A is the supertonic of a G major scale. So A Dorian, the first note is A, and Dorian means A is the supertonic of a scale. So I'm going to play from A to A, but I'm going to use the notes of G major, which is going to make it Dorian. And you learned in level 5 that G major has 1 sharp, F sharp. There's an A Dorian scale. It starts on A and it ends on A, but it stole its notes from the key of G major. Let's do another one. Let's do B flat Lydian, or you could say Lydian on B flat. The first thing we know for sure is that this mode starts on B flat. Here's a B flat, and it must also end on a B flat. Now it's B flat Lydian. What does Lydian mean? That's the first L word. I don't play like. Like means Lydian. That's I'm holding up 4 fingers. So that must mean subdominant to subdominant. So I know the first note is B flat, but now I must think. B flat is the subdominant of what major scale? B flat is the subdominant of F major scale. So I'm going to start on B and play up to B flat, but I'm going to steal the notes from F major. So I'm going to play an F major scale from B flat to B flat and call it B flat Lydian. So I started on B flat and I ended on B flat, and all of these notes are contained within F major's key signature. See, if it was a B flat major scale, I'd have played that E flat, but I didn't. It's an F major scale from subdominant to subdominant, and we can call it B flat Lydian, or and let's do one more just in case. Let's do D flat Mixolydian. The one thing I know for sure is the first note is D flat, and the next thing I have to ask myself is, what does Mixolydian mean? I don't play like my. M was the fifth word, so Mixolydian must mean dominant to dominant, 5 to 5. So I'm going to start the scale on D flat, but D flat is the fifth note of G flat major. So I'm going to play from D flat to D flat, but I'm going to use the notes from G flat major. So it almost looked like a D flat major scale, except for this one note. That C flat doesn't exist in D flat major. That's from the key signature of G flat. So the notes are from G flat major, but I started on D flat. And that's D flat Mixolydian. So those are the modes. So what we learned back in the scales unit and what we learned today is very, very similar. For example, if you were asked to write a C major scale from dominant to dominant, G to G, that's actually the same as saying write G Mixolydian, since G is the fifth of a C major scale. So remember, on your exam as well, you may also have to write these in the alto and tenor clefs, which is something we learned back in the scales unit. And the last important thing I have to mention, when you write modes, do not use key signatures. You always have to insert the accidentals physically into the mode you're writing, okay? It's a stylistic thing, because key signatures weren't really used the way we use them in the medieval times. So if you're asked to write a mode, you cannot put your key signature all nicely and neat on the left by the clef. You have to not use the key signatures, you have to know what the accidentals are, and then you have to physically write them into the actual mode you wrote. But this will all be easier to explain over at the whiteboard. So let's go there now and write it out so you can see what's actually going on.